皆さん大変長らくお待たせいたしました。ただいまよりセインズベリー日本芸術研究所サイモン・ケーナー教授による2024年度国際交流基金賞受賞記念講演会を開催いたします。講演会の開催にあたりまして、まずは国際交流基金理事佐藤由里よりご挨拶申し上げます。
皆様こんばんは。国際交流基金理事の佐藤由里でございます。本日は国際交流基金賞受賞記念講演会にご参加いただきまして誠にありがとうございます。私ども国際交流基金は国際相互理解の増進や国際友好親善の促進に特に顕著な功績のあった個人団体に対して国際交流基金賞を授与しております。この国際交流基金賞は今年度で51回目を迎えまして、一昨日の10月16日に本賞の授賞式を執り行いました。本年の受賞者は美術家である塩田千春様。モンゴル全土の日本語教育の発展と普及に多大な貢献をされてきたモンゴル日本語教師会、そして日本の芸術文化に関する調査、出版、交流のための研究機関であって、現在ではこの分野に関する欧州最大の研究機関の一つと数えられるようになったイギリスのセインズベリー日本芸術研究所です。本日はこの研究所の統括役所長であられるサイモン・ケイナー様にご登壇いただきます。ケイナー教授のご専門は考古学で、縄文時代、特に縄文土器を専門に研究されております。それとともに日本の縄文文化と世界とのつながりについて広く国際的に紹介をされています。本日のご講演ではセインズベリー日本芸術研究所のさまざまなプロジェクトを例にとって日本の芸術文化との関わりがどのようにして私たちの心を満たすのかについてお話しいただきます。さらにアーツカウンスルイングランドの最高責任者であるダレン・ヘイリー氏の言うアーツ・デビデント、芸術の配当なるものが新たなグローバルオーディエンスに届くためにデジタル化がどのように活用されうるのかという点についてもケイナー教授からお話を伺うことができると伺っておりまして、大変楽しみにしております。この講演会が皆様にとりまして有意義なものになりますことをお祈りしまして、私からのご挨拶とさせていただきます。ありがとうございます。
本日のケイナー教授の講演会ですけれども、まず最初に教授にご講演いただきまして、その後会場の皆様からのご質問をお受けする形になっております。本日の講演は日本語の逐次通訳を入れて英語で行います。ですが皆様からの質問に関しては日本語で結構です。それではケイナー教授よろしくお願いいたします。
Good evening, everybody. I have to apologize. I have to begin with an apology to my dear friend, Mr. Takanashi, because I'm going to be speaking in English again this evening rather than in Japanese. I would also like to begin by saying how hugely honored I am to be here and to be the recipient of a Japan Foundation Award on behalf of all my colleagues at the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures. I would have loved to have brought all of my colleagues with me this time so they could meet you all, but I'm pleased to say that in November I will be back in Japan with our university president and the chair of our board and some of my other colleagues, so I very much hope there will be an opportunity to introduce them to as many of you as possible then. The Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures was established exactly 25 years ago. Since then, we have grown from an operation that was 2 people and a parrot. The parrot has sadly left us, but we now have a group of about 16 people who are the core of the Sainsbury Institute staff. But in addition to that, those 16 people, we have a global network of hundreds of former research fellows and academic visitors and research partners here in Japan, in the UK, across Europe, and in North America. And I feel hugely privileged to be able to represent such an extraordinary group of people. And I'm just very fortunate to be able to follow my dreams in working in Japanese archaeology and Japanese art. And I must thank everybody at the Japan Foundation for facilitating my visit this week. I've had a wonderful week, and I've been able to catch up with many old friends, and it's so delightful to see so many of you giving up your Friday evening to come and listen to me this evening. Thank you. So when the Japan Foundation invited me to speak today, they said, what topic would you like to choose? And I have to say it's very difficult because the Sainsbury Institute covers all, or well, it's alleged that we cover all aspects of Japanese arts and cultures, from prehistory to the present, and indeed even into the future, and from Hokkaido to Okinawa. So I'm not going to even attempt to present the whole range of research topics which we've covered over the last 25 years. As an archaeologist, I'm used to dealing with just fragments of past realities. And so what I'm going to present you this evening are some fragments of some of the projects that we've been working on. And I hope it will give you just some idea of what we've been up to, and also I might say a little bit about what we're hoping to do in the future as well. When I first came to Japan, and it's 40 years ago this year, I can't believe that, many of my fellow students and my friends and my family and my parents' friends thought I was bonkers. I didn't know very much about Japan, but I knew that I wanted to find out more about the incredible archaeology that I'd been introduced to by my professor at the University of Cambridge, Professor Gina Lee Barnes. In a rather strange twist of fate, as a student, I worked, what do you say in English? There's not a good English word for arbeito, but anyway, I had a job in a Sainsbury's supermarket working on the tills. And in fact, it was some of the money that I'd earned in Sainsbury's that allowed me to come to Japan in the first place. I had no idea where it might lead. What I do know is that the opportunities that I've been given to work in Japan have allowed me to develop a very enjoyable and happy career. And I'm now very aware that studying Japan, interest in Japan, is no longer the niche, exclusive thing that it was when I first came here 40 years ago. And I think it is testament to our founding benefactors of the Sainsbury Institute, Sir Robert and Lady Lisa Sainsbury, and our founding director, Professor Nicole Coolidge-Romanier, and our earliest trustees, including Dame Elizabeth Esteve Cole, who sadly passed away just a few weeks ago. Their vision at a time when Japan and Japanese art was not so widely regarded in the UK has been proven to be very prescient. But I'm very aware we would not be able to do anything that we do today without the support of all of our friends in Japan, including obviously the Japan Foundation, but in particular it's a pleasure to have Professor Kawai Masatomo here. Professor Kawai has been with the Institute right from its inception and has given us tremendous guidance over the last 25 years. So thank you, Kawai-sensei. So I think I can safely say that although we live in a rather troubled world, for many of the students who I speak to on a daily basis, their interest and engagement with Japan makes them feel better. And this has fueled a boom in interest in Japan, Japanese language, Japanese food, Japanese manga, Japanese cinema, Japanese arts and cultures in broad. So my topic today is how arts and cultures can make us feel better. And I should apologize on behalf of all of us foreigners that maybe this interest has led to a spot of over-tourism in some of the more popular places of Japan. Through our programs at the Sainsbury Institute and at the University of East Anglia, we try to make sure that the people who are associated with us, at least, have some understanding of the cultural context that they're going to be coming into. This is particularly important because, as I will speak about in a few minutes, in Britain at least, we are in the middle of what is known as a mental health crisis. And this is particularly affecting the younger generations. And since they are the future for all of us, I feel it's very important to think, how can we address that? And I've been thinking, how can we use our work in Japanese arts and cultures to try and alleviate some of those problems? And I hope by the end of the next hour or so, you might agree with me that there are ways that we can be using Japanese arts and cultures for that purpose. So I'm particularly grateful to the Japan Foundation for inviting me this autumn, because we have two fabulous exhibitions have just opened in Tokyo that I've been able to see while I've been here. The first is at the Tokyo National Museum and opened on Wednesday, and it's just about Haniwa. And there are some very happy Haniwa. Surely visiting them can only help cheer anybody up. And there is another exhibition at the National Museum of Modern Art, which is, I think, a really interesting exhibition looking at Haniwa and Dogu through the eyes of modern artists. So we have a Dogu on the, one of my favorite Dogu on the left with its arms up, looking very cheerful. But my question for you is, who is happiest? Is it the Haniwa or is it the Dogu? But there's a problem here, because it's about how we define happiness. I was discussing with Mai, who's doing this wonderful translation, how are we going to translate that difficult word? And of course, we're very lucky in Japanese because we have katakana, so we just decided we would go with happiness. But perhaps one of the more serious points I would make this evening as an archaeologist and working in arts and cultures is that I think there is a strong case to say that happiness is a culturally constructed concept. I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures to situate us where I come from. Many of you have visited the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures in our lovely 12th century building in the center of the finest historic city that we have in England. Unlike in Japan, British trains are notoriously unreliable. But on a good day, you can get from London to Norwich in about 2 hours on our own version of the Shinkansen. I said I would mention a little bit about our future plans. My dream is that we could have a maglev track from Norwich Station leading to the Sainsbury Centre at the University of East Anglia. This is the University of East Anglia, and this is the home to the Sainsbury Centre, which is the University Art Museum. And this is the home of the Sainsbury collections, and this is where the Sainsbury Institute's story begins as well. When I arrived for my interview at the Sainsbury Institute, I had no idea that it was taking place in the same building as the best collection of Japanese archaeology on public display outside Japan, including this very fine goggle-eyed figurine from about 2,500 to 3,000 years ago. We'll see him or her or they again before the end of the talk. So I mentioned that there's been a lot of interest in Japanese culture in the UK recently, and here are 3 articles from the last week which have been published. 3 very different areas of Japanese culture. One is Marie Kondo and how we should get rid of all of our junk. Now that was in The Guardian, and they have very good coverage of Japan. I don't know how many of you read The Spectator. It used to be edited by somebody called Boris Johnson. And here in a rather typical sort of comment from The Spectator, their article is entitled, "I think we're turning Japanese." But it's a very positive article, in fact, but it talks about many of the plays based on Japanese anime, which are now on in London, including Spirited Away, which has been completely sold out, despite the cheapest tickets being about £200. But my favourite is the third one, in a journal that you might not regularly read called Vittles. Now, of course, Japanese cuisine is now recognized as World Heritage by UNESCO. Now, I'm not sure if katsukare was part of the nomination, but this article is all about the katsuification of Britain. Okay, a bit more serious, but it's still about the UN. As many of you know, the United Nations have agreed 30 sustainable development goals, which we are supposed to meet by 2030. And one of those is about ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being, which would include happiness for all at all ages. And in my area, that has led to many organizations considering how what we do relates to well-being, and that would include museums, art galleries, archaeological organizations. I don't have time this evening to go into this in too much detail, but I wanted to show you these two next slides to demonstrate that there is a very clear framework now for engaging with well-being and happiness in my sector, the historic environment, archaeology and art sectors. And it is leading to organizations such as Historic England, which would be the equivalent of the Agency for Cultural Affairs here in Japan, and many private foundations, including here the Baring Foundation and the Restoration Trust, working closely with people with low mental health to see how they can benefit from the areas that we work in. One of the best examples is a project called Humanhenge. I'll be talking a little bit about our work with Stonehenge shortly, but this is one of the projects that has been inspiring us, and it has been through the work on this project with people with low mental health and archaeology professionals and mental health doctors, it has now been demonstrated that structured engagement with historic sites improves people's mental health. Art therapy is an area that many of you may be already familiar with, but you may be less familiar with the new counterpart called cultural heritage therapy. In Britain at the moment, we don't only have a mental health crisis, we also have a crisis for funding of the arts. The current chairman of the Arts Council of England, Darren Henley, has written these two splendid short books explaining the concept of the art dividend. And through 7 points, he explains very clearly the obvious benefits of access to art and culture to everybody in the country, and the benefits, both economic as well as social and cultural, that the art dividend can bring. Now, of course, happiness is not a new concept in Japan, really. The first exhibition in the Mori Art Museum was called Happiness. There's a J-pop group called Happiness. And there's a manga by Oshimi Shuzo called Happiness, although that doesn't seem to be so very happy at all. And indeed, the Japan Foundation has sponsored exhibitions on the theme of happiness across Asia. And you're all familiar with Fukurokujo, who of course is one of the 7 gods of good, of good being, and he is of course the god of happiness, as well as being wisdom and longevity, making that connection between those areas. The Dalai Lama's written a book about happiness, and of course there are more Japanese authors who have engaged with this topic as well. As I was preparing this talk, I was delighted to find that there's a whole conference dedicated to happiness studies, and they will be meeting in New Orleans next year if you're interested in attending. Now, turning to the more academic. There is an evolutionary psychologist by the name of David Buss, and based at the University of Texas at Austin. He published this very interesting paper in American Psychology in 2000. And he looked at this notion of happiness from a cross-cultural perspective and tried to understand barriers to improving the quality of life, or what are the barriers to enhancing happiness on a global scale. One of the ideas that particularly struck me is that he feels there is a discrepancy between modern and what he describes as ancestral environments, the kind of environments that the people that I study as an archaeologist would have grown up in. Now, reading such academic articles might not seem to be the best way to improve our own happiness as scholars, and I'm not sure how many of us would regard a visit to a museum as a great way of enhancing our happiness either. But I was particularly struck by a display at the Fukushima Prefectural Museum, whose director, oh my goodness, sorry, whose director, senior moment, Akasaka Norio, created this rather wonderful display about a Jomon period pit house. In one of the many fascinating conversations I've had over the last week in Tokyo, somebody said to me, Japanese people are really bored of reconstructed pit houses. So Akasaka Sensei reinvented the pit house as a work of art. And he had flowers and other colorful things woven into the roof, lifting the spirits of everybody who saw it. And on the right, although these are not pit houses, they look very much like pit houses. And these are art installations by Chim Pon and other contemporary Japanese artists. And I wonder if there's not some overlap there. Maybe there's hope for the humble pit house yet. I've always been fascinated by the creative and innovative ways that archaeological heritage gets used in Japan in the modern world. As many of you know, I have a soft spot for flame pots. And in fact, we worked very closely with Professor Kobayashi Tatsuo of Kokugakuin University to try and get the Olympic cauldron for the Tokyo Olympic Games in 2021 in the shape of a flame pot. For some reason, the idea was not successful. Maybe they should have built the Olympic Stadium in Niigata as well. I mentioned that we're doing some very interesting work on digital things at the moment. This is work undertaken by Professor Fujita Haruhiro of the Niigata University of International and Information Studies. I didn't understand the title of this paper either, although somewhat embarrassingly I'm a co-author. But I've been working with Miao Toru, who is one of the curators at the Niigata Prefectural Museum of History, right in the center of Flame Pot Land. And he, Professor Fujita, and others are creating 3D digital scans of flame pots. And as part of their research, using virtual reality technology, with students, they are working out how looking at these pots makes those students feel. Are they relaxed or tense, or are they cheerful or gloomy? These are scales, and some very interesting work going on here. I'm going to quickly take you through a couple of projects which we've been working on, which have definitely had an impact on people's well-being and sense of happiness. The overarching project we've called Global Perspectives on British Archaeology. But what we've been doing is comparing British archaeological sites with their Japanese counterparts. And we created one of the most inconvenient exhibits I've ever worked with, called the Archaeoglobe. 2 meters in diameter, and so it had to travel in a special vehicle to all the different locations we were displaying it. One of the sites we chose is a place called Grimes Graves, which is a Neolithic flint mine about 5,000 years old, close to our institute in Norfolk. And we established the world's first twinned archaeological site between Grimes Graves and a site called Hoshikuso in Nagano Prefecture, which is an obsidian mine. This project has led to over 100 students from Japan and 100 students, high school students, from the UK making bilateral visits to each other's archaeological sites and learning archaeological English and Japanese in the process. I've been very struck by the number of archaeological festivals that happen in Japan. This is the Obsidian Festival that takes place each August in Nagawamachi, where the Hoshikuso sites are located. Here I am meeting Mayor Hata Kenichiro, perhaps the most dedicated Jomon mayor in Japan. But again, there's a serious point here. So the students from England come from what we describe as chaotic family backgrounds. And for them, their archaeology club is a safe place, a refuge that they can go and organize all sorts of activities. And the Japanese students, because of the rural depopulation that is happening in Japan, can no longer go to high school in their own town. That high school has closed down. They have to move to a nearby city, the city of Ueda, in order to attend high school. And Mayor Hata's idea is that by demonstrating the international significance of their archaeological heritage, those students will continue to take an interest in their hometown. And to celebrate that relationship, a unique artwork was produced, which is made of Norfolk flint and Nagawa obsidian, and it now adorns the wall of the new town hall in Nagawamachi. And it's a source, I would say, of great pride and happiness to both of those communities, and deserves to be known more widely. And here I would like to thank the Japanese foundations, the Toshiba International Foundation, the Nippon Foundation, the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation, the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation, and the Japan Foundation, who have supported these kind of grassroots connections. So again, while researching this talk, I came across the World Happiness Report. And I discovered that the United Kingdom comes in number 21 in the world, but Japan comes in number 50. So what's that all about? Well, you might find some answers in this book by Manzin writer and Hortius called Happiness and the Good Life in Japan, which is an anthropological study of happiness here. I don't have time to go into all of that this evening, but I think it's a topic of future interest to both us in the UK and here in Japan as well. But it may well lie in this idea that happiness itself is a cultural construct rather than being a universal. Sorry, something has gone a bit wrong with this slide, but it makes the point that if you're not happy, mainly perhaps you're lonely. And here in Japan and in Germany, there have been political moves to give government ministers responsibility for loneliness. And indeed, in today's newspaper, I saw that the Japanese Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, is developing ideas around a new happiness index for you all. So in the last few minutes, I want to just give you a couple of other examples of projects that have brought me great happiness. And it's a great pleasure to have Hiromi Uchida with us today, because Hiromi worked with us on these projects 15 years ago. And these projects were focused on Jomon period Dogu figures. We weren't the only people who liked Dogu. This is the Nobel Prize-winning Japanese author Kawabata Yasunori, who apparently wrote many of his works in the company of his favorite Dogu figure. as part of one of the exhibitions, we tried to get people to think about Jomon people's emotions and state of mind. And to encourage them in that, every visitor to the exhibition was given a small modern Dogu to carry around with them while they looked at the exhibits. We know that most Dogu were deliberately broken before they ended up in the ground in the Jomon period. So we encouraged our visitors to deliberately break their Dogu and leave a bit of it in our conceptual archaeological trench. Now, they had received these objects for free as part of the exhibition, but we know that less than 20% of the visitors broke their figurines and left a piece behind. And when the museum attendants quizzed the people who were clearly taking their complete Dogu home with them, it became apparent that they would be very unhappy if they had to do that. So we felt maybe our modern visitors had some sense of some of the sensibilities of our Jomon forebears. I think as an archaeologist, and there's some archaeologists in the room, I suspect one of the moments that we are happiest is when we make interesting and exciting discoveries and these things pop out of the ground for us and we're the first people to encounter them in many thousands of years. We're running out of time, but I want to just show you a few pictures. I'm going to take you through this next bit of the talk just by showing you the pictures, and then I want to finish with a few comments from my colleagues in the Sainsbury Institute. These are some of the things that I've seen over the last few years working on Jomon sites that have made me smile, including the successful inscription of 17 Jomon sites in northern Japan as World Heritage in 2021. And this inspired us to create our own archaeology and well-being project, working on sites near my institute in Norwich. And here the red arrow points to the cathedral in Norwich, and the site is just in front of us. So we're within walking distance of my institute to get to this site. It's a Neolithic henge, our East Anglian version of Stonehenge, if you like. We called this project Archaeology for Wellbeing at Arminghall Henge, and we received funding from the United Kingdom's National Lottery Heritage Fund because we were working with volunteer groups and people with low mental health and with school students. And this group is determined to visit Japan one day, so we're working on that at the moment. They make very delicious cakes. This one demonstrates the principle of stratigraphy. And yes, we invited the volunteers to write daily diaries and draw pictures as much as possible. And this one was greatly inspired by Japanese calligraphy, although they're actually human figures gathering around the wooden henge. And over the last year, with the support of the Ishibashi Foundation and English Heritage, we've been able to put some of these ideas in practice at an exhibition at Stonehenge itself, where we were introducing Japanese prehistoric stone circles with our own British-designed Yuru-kyara. That Stonehenge attracts 1.5 million visitors every year. And many of them are coming because they feel the site itself has healing properties. And many people joined us for experiences of making Jomon-style pottery and figurines in the volunteer tent at Stonehenge. These events were all sold out weeks in advance. In another world first, this is the first flame pot to be made at Stonehenge. And courtesy of the Japan Foundation, we were able to hold an international conference on stone circles across Eurasia in one of the community centres in the nearby city of Salisbury, which was very successful. But in another world first, perhaps one I'm most proud of, we also got Japanese taiko drummers at Stonehenge on the last day of the exhibition. So, in the last minute or two, I'm just going to show you, I'm not going to try, we won't worry about translating any of these, but about a week ago, I wrote to all of my colleagues, our staff, our professional staff in the Sainsbury institute without whom we would not be able to do any of our projects, and also our wide circle of former research fellows all around the world. And I said, could you select one picture which sums up for you what makes you happy about working with Japanese arts and cultures? And could you give me 10 words which I can put on the slide? And some of the academics wrote much more than 10 words, but my professional colleagues actually did really nicely in boiling them down. I just want to give you a flavor of these as a message from all of my colleagues at the Sainsbury Institute to you, and as a thanks to the Japan Foundation for the tremendous honor that you've done us in this our 25th anniversary year. And perhaps I'll just say something about this particular slide, because I have to say it's one of my favorites as well. In May this year, we had the most extraordinary week, probably the best week we've ever had in the Sainsbury Institute, when we were joined by 12 priests associated with the Hasedera temple in Sakurai city in Nara, thanks to an introduction from Dr. Tateishi Toru, who's with us today, and Mr. Kobayashi Kanji, one of the priests from Hasedera. And these priests specialize in chanting Buddhist texts, Oshomyo. And they brought with them a replica of the largest scroll painting in Japan, 12 meters high. And our original plan was to display it in Norwich Cathedral. But for some reason, the Bishop of Norwich Cathedral didn't think that was such a great idea. So instead, we displayed it in Norwich City Library, which really was a great idea. And several thousand people came and heard the priests chanting. And if I can just tell you, there was a very happy vicar in this church, the biggest city church we have, because we had a concert of Oshomyo chanting and medieval Norwich plain song chanting. The people in red are the Norwich choir. The people in these splendid robes are our friends from Hasedera. 200 people came to hear this, and the vicar told me there have never been more than 100 people in this church as far as he's aware. And just a few more of these messages, which we will be putting on the website of the Sainsbury Institute, I think, as part of our thanks to the Japan Foundation for this wonderful week. I would like also to say that the visit by the Hasedera priests was facilitated by a very generous grant from the Japan Foundation and also from the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation UK office. I love the fact that even a bar of soap can be the object chosen by one of our most distinguished previous fellows. And for me, it's the opportunity we have to work with young people, with new generations, for example, through this program, our Japan Orientation Program, where we worked with the Toshiba International Foundation and the Japan Foundation, in particular through their Budapest office, that allowed us to bring many students that would not be able to be exposed to some of these slightly bonkers ideas that we have in Norwich. So I'd like to end by thanking all of our supporters, and I'd love to know which ones you think are happiest. Is it the Haniwa or the Dogu? Thank you very much indeed for your attention. Doかな非常に難しい質問ですね。まあ両方ですね、すごくハッピーと思いますけれども、でも実はですね、道具はね、みんなでよくは可愛い可愛いとおっしゃってますけれども、でも実はですね、道具は本当にちょっと怖いじゃないですかと思いますから、多分本当のハッピーは埴輪の方じゃないですか。ありがとうございます。ですね、当時私ケンブリッジ大学の考古学の学生でした。そして日本のちょっと偶然なんですけれども、その時にジーナ・バーンズという先生が、彼女は日本の考古学の専門家ですけれども、日本の考古学の講座 ありました。そしてそれはちょっと興味があって、そして僕の大学の3年生の春休みですか、ちょうど最後の試験の前に4週間ぐらいバーン先生と他の多分2、3人ぐらいですかと一緒に日本に来て、そしてバーン先生の研究プロジェクトは奈良盆地で弥生時代の畑の痕跡が見つからなかったんですから、降林調査ですかのために来ました。2週間ぐらい3月の奈良ちょっと寒かったんですけれども、でも最後の時期に桜が咲いてまして、そして花見もできまして、そしてその後日本の博物館とか日本の考古学の方々に具体的に初めてお目にかかりました。それまでに2年間ぐらいですか、写真とかこのスライドとかちょっと古い本だけがありまして、本物を見て、いやこれは素晴らしいじゃないですか。そして実はその後すごくいい経験があって、当時ですね、今ジェットプログラムということがあるでしょ。当時はね、ジェットプログラムの前のベッドプログラムということがありまして、British English Teachers ですか。だからイギリスに帰ってその試験がありましたですけど、試験はあんまり良くなかったですけど、その後そのベッドプログラムに申し込んでて、そして2年間兵庫県にあるなんとか丹波篠山というところで高校で英会話のことをやりましたですから、すごくいい機会がありました。でも最初の時期からなんとか契約はなかったんですけど、でも少しずついろんな機会が開けてそういう感じで日本のことについてできましたということです。
慶南教授、どうもありがとうございました。では大変名残惜しいんですけれども、ちょっとお時間になりました。皆様、慶南教授にもう一度大きな拍手をお願いいたします。